We pay homage to the Buddha, the one who has overcome all suffering and who has transcended the limitations of afflicting emotions. In this chapter today, the Buddha speaks about the qualities of one who has realized, known as Arhat or Arahant. It very literally means one who is worthy. So I will first go through the main teachings and then go to some of the stories related to the teachings. The Buddha says that suffering does not exist for one who has completed the journey. Such a one is without sorrow, emancipated or liberated in every respect, having abandoned all bonds, all ties. The mindful ones, those who have mindfulness, do not find delight in dwellings, in places to dwell in. They abandon every abode, just like swans leaving a pond. Those who do not accumulate and have well understood true nourishment, whose sphere or whose world is liberation without any attributes, their pathway is difficult to find. They are like birds coursing through the sky. They whose taints or whose defilements are completely dissolved, who are not attached to nourishment, whose sphere, whose world is liberation without any attributes, their pathway is difficult to find. They are like birds coursing through the sky. One whose senses are quiet, just like horses well tamed by the charioteer. Even the gods envy such a one, because he or she has completely dissolved pride and is free from afflicting emotions. Such a one is no longer obstructed, is just like the earth, is like Indra's Vajra, the thunderbolt of Indra. Such a one is truly virtuous, is like a lake without any mud. And for such a one, there is no longer any rebirth. His mind is peaceful. His speech and actions are peaceful. Of such a one, the right knowledge arises ever in tranquility, in peace. One who does not blindly trust, but knows nirvana, who has broken the connections, who has given up all wishes and expectations, such a one is the greatest person indeed. Uttama Puriso in Pali. In Sanskrit it would be Uttama Purusha. It's the greatest person indeed. Whether such a one is in a village or in the forest, in a valley or on a hill, wherever the arhats live, that place is pleasant. Delightful are the woods, where the crowd does not find delight. Those free from desire will find delight there, because they do not seek after pleasures. You will remember the chart which Adityaji and myself prepared. I will share it again now so that we can discuss these teachings again. Oh, the chart is here. Yes. This is the basic teaching of the Buddha, that it looks a little complicated for those who are new, that our non-dual true nature, this is what we keep on calling the true nature, our innermost being, that which is beyond the bodily experience, beyond the mental experience, beyond the emotional personality that we have at present. That is what we call the true nature. You can call it something else if you want, but I think the true nature is a very good term. This is what we call non-dual. Through ignorance, a sense of division exists or arises in this pure non-dual nature that we have. The sense that I am something here, you are something there. I am an individual, there is a world out there, and, to put it simply, the world is out to get me, which generates fear, which generates suffering. But before this suffering sets in, the Buddha explains that this very basic ignorance first manifests as a sense of me, a permanent me, aham graha, that our personality grows or develops in such a way that we are always self-oriented. And because we are self-oriented, we want to protect the interests of the self or the ego. Thus, a basic division arises from this self-orientation, known as self-grasping. A basic division arises, a liking or attachment and a disliking or aversion. And these further split up into pride, which is an unhealthy liking for oneself and one's own possessions, and jealousy, which is a dislike or aversion and a liking for others, but a dislike for oneself. And these basic emotions give rise to all the other afflicting emotions. Each of these basic five we should say, which are known as kleshas. If there's anything you take away from this class on Buddha's teachings, it is the term kleshas, the afflicting emotions, that which afflicts us. Not only now in this life, but for many lifetimes to come, are these basic emotions, these five, and all their children, all the emotions that they are related to. So for instance, the emotion of pride has a spectrum. there can be a smugness, a certain basic sense that I am special. Most of us spiritual people, we have that, isn't it? Otherwise, we wouldn't be spiritual, right? We want to be something special after all. It's one of the most fundamental emotions that we spiritual people have. And there's this basic smugness, a basic sense of being something special. And that, in a stronger version, is then vanity. That becomes pretentiousness, superiority, arrogance, ultimately self-obsession. When someone just makes a little critical remark, we go into downward spiral of injury. We feel so upset that we aren't the ones being honored, and so forth. Now, many of us don't have that, to that extreme. But perhaps we can identify some of these emotions. And similarly, dislike or aversion is also a spectrum. There can be a basic not preferring something. Then this can lead to an aversion. That leads to a dislike. That can lead to a disgust. That can lead to a fear or anxiety. Then there is great anger. Anger turns into hate or hatred. That can turn into terror. So all these emotions can be broken down into these basic 5. And these 5 emotions cause our mind to be in a certain way, to have certain patterns, and then to act in certain patterns, across certain patterns. And these actions, which are also inner actions, not only the externally visible actions, have a result, an effect. This effect is visible on the one hand, and it is also invisible. The invisible part is what we call karma, destiny. Whereas the visible part is what we call science. Science is all about cause and effect. We all know, and you all know this example I always give, that if I drop this glass, it will probably break. That is simply science. So that is the seen, the visible result. But the sages, the Buddha, tell us that there is an invisible result. And this invisible result has a wholesome or positive aspect. And when the deeds or the states are negative, it has an unwholesome or negative result. It also causes a mental habit that goes not just into this life, but is transmitted to future lives in the form of a seed. The seed takes time to manifest. It takes time to come to fruition. It can take years and years. But this seed will certainly 100% come to fruition in the form of outer and inner experiences. Outer experiences that are pleasant, that are pleasurable, that are conducive, good conditions, but also the opposite. And these, because we don't like them, and some of them we like, of course, those we like, they cause further attachment. Those we dislike cause further dislike. And thus the cycle is perpetuated. And we cycle and cycle and cycle like hamsters in a wheel until we go through these long enough for a certain exhaustion to arise, a certain insight to arise into these, understanding somehow that it is in fact these emotional states which cause all the problems. That is already a tremendous insight. If you have this insight, it is almost you've gone half the way to enlightenment. But if you only think you have the insight, but then the next moment you entertain anger, you entertain superiority, arrogance, greed, all these feelings, then that is your choice. But the problem is the cycle is continuing. So on the path of the Buddha, we take responsibility for our own states and we apply antidotes to them. What are these antidotes? These antidotes are known as methods, upaya. They are known as maitri, compassion, kindness, compassion, karuna, joyful appreciation, mudita, equanimity, upeksha, which we will hear about end of this month on the 24th of April, when we will have our retreat on equanimity. And then concentration, samadhi, yoga, mantra, all these methods have the purpose to counteract these basic emotions. But the most powerful and most important of them all is in fact awareness. Sati in Pali, to be aware of them, to have insight into them, which the Buddha calls vipassana. To actually have insight into these states, and not only into the negative ones. You see, this is what people sometimes misunderstand. People think that all of this is just about thinking, where are my attachments, where is my pride, where is my jealousy and all that. No, no, no. It is also about recognizing the kindness we have in us, the compassion we have in us, the joy we have in us. You understand? That is why insight is the most important step in the Buddha's path. To have a certain peacefulness of mind and then to have insight into oneself. So once in a while I will go through this chart so that you really learn this and that you take it very seriously. So now for some stories. Some of these stories are always a little funny and they reflect, in some sense, the conditions at the time. When the Buddha says that those who have mindfulness, those who have sati, awareness, do not delight in dwellings. They don't delight in places they live in. In fact, they abandon dwellings like swans that leave a pond. That sort of irritates us in modern times because, after all, our main occupation is to make sure that our dwelling is nice. I'm sure, Neelam, you spend a lot of time decorating your apartment, making sure that it's nice. I'm just joking. Or Yuka sort of seems to me to be someone who pays a lot of attention to her dwelling, and that is needed. Or Pushpaben, I'm sure, I've been to her home and it was very nice. Pays a lot of attention to how her dwelling is, and that is needed also. However, what the Buddha means is, if we spend so much energy, if we invest so much energy into where we are right now, to holding on to where we are, then we can never grow into realizing the true nature. Because it is like we're stuck in that, stuck in where we are. So, a truly wise person, someone with realization, is like a swan who can be in the beautiful pool, but then can also leave the pool. And maybe go back to the pool when it is needed. That we develop a certain ease with which we look at our outer and inner dwellings. So here there is a story that once the Buddha spent the rainy season at Rajagriha with a number of bhikshus, monks and nuns, and about 2 weeks before the end of the rainy season, the Buddha informed them that they would soon be leaving Rajagriha and said that they could prepare for departure, because it was very common not to travel in the rainy season. Since the rainy season has a lot of animals, worms, and so on the ground, so that the animals are not crushed, are not harmed, monks and nuns would stay in one place during the Chaturmasya, the 4 months of the rainy season, and then after that was finished, they would continue traveling. So some bhikshus, some monks and nuns, went to stitching their robes and dyeing their robes and washing old robes. And one of them, Mahakashyapa, was also washing their robes. But some of the other monks speculated that there are so many people here in Rajagriha who love and respect Mahakashyapa, and they're looking after him, they invite him to their homes. We think he's going to stay here. We don't think he's going to come on a trip, another journey. He's not going to leave his devotees. Now, there's sort of some jealousy or envy going on there. And then, after the 2 weeks were over, the Buddha said that some of the bhikshus should actually stay at the monastery so that they could continue to initiate others into meditation, maybe also help with funeral ceremonies when people die, that someone sacred is there, someone wise is there to help them. And the Buddha said that the most suitable person would be Mahakashyapa. So he said that Mahakashyapa should remain in Rajagriha with a few other monks and nuns. Now, the others who didn't hear the Buddha give this instruction, when they came to know that Mahakashyapa is staying there, they said, see, we knew it. Mahakashyapa is too attached to his devotees, just as we predicted, he's staying here. And when the Buddha heard this, he said that, "O monks, are you trying to say that my son Kashyapa is attached to his lay disciples in Rajagriha and to the offerings they make? You are very much mistaken. He is not attached to anything. He is like a swan that can leave the pond at any time." And that is when he gave this instruction. So you see, it is not about Neelam leaving her home. In fact, it's quite cold in Edinburgh, I think. It's not about anyone leaving their house, but it is about understanding our attachments. It's about identifying and becoming aware of these inner dwellings, these inner abodes that we create for ourselves, that we construct. These identities, in some sense, that we construct where we think this is the only way I can be, like this and no other way. And that's simply not true. When we bring awareness to our own inner states, with time, these states do transform. And we turn into a wiser person, into a more loving person, into a more compassionate person. It really is so. It's like a miracle. But we need to bring our awareness to the inner states. Then it can begin to happen. When we never do that, when we just want to be ourselves, this is how we are, I will never change, that's okay. But then, as you grow older, you will become more and more rigid. Certain personality traits will become more and more fixed. And that's it. That's who you will be for the rest of your remaining lifetime. Whereas, when you become aware of all your states, and when you engage with loving kindness, when you practice loving kindness, maitri, again and again and again and again, every day, without exception, these personality traits begin to melt. You find yourself more loving, more compassionate. And then, as a consequence of that, you find yourself happier. Because love and compassion go hand in hand with happiness. Even modern science knows this. And then there is an interesting story that while the Buddha was staying at the Jetavana monastery, there was a young lad named Revata, who happened to be the youngest brother of one of the chief disciples of Buddha, known as Sariputta. And this was the only brother and sister of Sariputta who hadn't left and become a monk. So his parents were very anxious to get him married off. And Revata was only a teenager when his parents arranged for a marriage to a young girl. And at the wedding reception, this is quite mean, this story. At the wedding reception, he saw a really old lady, maybe in her 90s. And then he looked at his bride, seeing that she is very beautiful and full of life and joy. And then he looked at the really old lady, and he was intelligent enough to know that the one condition will one day lead to the other. So the young, beautiful girl will one day look like the 90-year-old. So he realized that all beings are subject to aging and decay. So there and then he said, no, I'm not going to do this. I want to become a Buddha. I want to become enlightened. I'm not going to get tied up in this samsara like my brothers and sisters. And there and then he ran. So it's a sort of mean story, because what about the bride and what about the wedding reception? And imagine that happened to you, Neelam, when finally you find your bridegroom and then he says, you know what, on the day of the wedding, I'm going to run. That would be very sad, wouldn't it? But you see, this is a story here, and I can imagine that this happened as well. But he ran and went to the monastery and requested Sariputta to make him a monk. And Sariputta did so and gave him an object of meditation. In ancient times, according to people's personality, they would give certain meditation objects. Like some people would be given the meditation object of the breath. This is what is very important in the Buddha's meditation. Also in Krishna, the way Krishna taught meditation is the breath. Some people find it very boring, but actually it is very powerful to meditate on the breath, on the inhalation and the exhalation. This is known as ānapanasati or prana smriti, because lodged within the inhalation and the exhalation is a subtle energy. And when we pay attention to this, then the emotions slowly become resolved through again and again coming back to the inhalation and the exhalation. It's a very powerful meditation. One of the best ones, in fact. In many cases, more powerful and more effective than mantra meditations. But we don't have to make it a competition. It can also be hand in hand. So, this chap was given a meditation object and went away to practice it. And he practiced it for one whole rainy season. And within just one rainy season, he attained realization. Thanks to this powerful practice and his devotion and commitment to the practice. So then the Buddha was on one of his travels, came to that place, and the Buddha was delighted by the progress that he had made and praised him, saying that delightful are the forests where the crowd does not find delight. Those free from desires will find delight there. They who do not seek after pleasures. I have said time and again that these teachings very much oriented towards monastics, but the primary message applies to all, to so-called lay people, that is all of us, and also to monastics. It is simply the reality that our attachments cause troubles, that our anger, our upsets, our discontent causes trouble to us and to others. This is simply the truth. It is not so because the Buddha said it, you see. This is a teaching a very intelligent person could also discover for themselves. But of course, someone who attained enlightenment, like the Buddha, became a beacon of light, a beacon of guidance to all of us. So when we hear it from him, it is all the more powerful. Greater than just a state of temporary happiness or exhilaration or joy, which is followed by its opposite, greater than that is a state of equanimity. We will hear a lot about equanimity in our retreat, but it is really the state all of us should be aiming for. Many people ask us about steps on the path. Where do I see progress? How do I know that my spiritual practice is producing results? And many people measure their own results based on fantastic experiences they have. That's okay. That's fine. For example, I saw this light, or I had that dream, or I felt such and such energy, and so on and so forth. That's all okay. But on the Buddha's path, those things are not so important. What is important is the question, do we have equanimity? Rather than the question, do I have infinite bliss? I should ask the question, do I have equanimity? If the answer is no, then we should work on that. Equanimity towards extremes is much more important than fantastic spiritual experiences. It is really so. As you can imagine, growing up with lots of spiritual people, and some of them truly, truly great yogis, I have heard so many things. I have met so many people whose Kundalini and so on and so forth supposedly had arisen, and who saw this deity and that divinity, and who had this and that intuition. So many things. There's almost nothing you can tell me about that I haven't heard before. But instantly, the question that arises in me is always, let's see what happens. Will that person in the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 1 month, 2 months, remain in that state of exhilaration? Or will this go away again and something else will come? You understand the question? Because when something else will come, some state of agitation, some state of upset, some state of irritation, it means, if you remember our chart that Adityaji and myself had prepared, well, he prepared it, that means samsara is continuing. If the emotion of anger or agitation is still there in me, it doesn't matter if I have seen deities. Really, it doesn't matter. Because if the emotion of irritation or anger is there in me, it means that my samsara will continue. And many people who hear this don't like that, because this is simply bitter. It's a bitter truth. But it is like that. So no matter how many deities you see, or how many, kundalinis arise in you, or how many intuitions you have, it doesn't matter if you don't have equanimity. So work on equanimity. How do we work on equanimity? For the remaining 15 minutes, we will just observe the rising and falling of our breath, rather than go into exhilarating states or their opposites. Like the Buddha teaches, like Krishna teaches, we will just observe the rising and falling of prana and apana. And the way to do it is to look at the abdomen. Not to look physically, you can, but to pay attention to the abdomen as it rises and falls. And what do we do with all the states, all the emotions, all the thoughts that come in the interim? We just let them come. Because our job is to pay attention to the prana and the apana, the rising and the falling, the inhalation and the exhalation. That's our job. So all the emotion, all the thoughts, you just let them be. Let them be, let them do what they do. We just come back to the breath. All right? And then we will finish the session. So, please start the meditation. Pay attention to rising and falling of the breath. Just bring the mind back to that again and again. Don't strain. Now, from this peaceful state that comes about when we really just observe the inhalation and exhalation, we wish all beings to be happy and at ease. We practice Maitri for all beings, not for specific beings, just for all beings. Just for a short while. It is very beautiful always to end the practice by paying homage to the Buddha, the Enlightened One, and all the other enlightened beings, and request them to turn the wheel of Dharma, to continue being present in our hearts and to grant teachings. It's a very auspicious wish. Now, if there are any questions for the remaining part of the session, please feel free to ask questions. You can also write in the chat.
Hi, Vidyābhāskarji. Can you hear me?
Remember that equanimity is really the goal initially. So if you want to know, are there any benchmarks? Can I measure my progress? You ask the question of equanimity. We can even have equanimity towards severe inner states. Many people are suffering nowadays. Oh, has someone been speaking? Did someone ask a question?
Yeah, hi, can you hear me, Vidyābhāskarji?
Oh, now I can hear you. So sorry, I didn't have my speakers on. So that's what you call a monologue.
Oh.
So sorry. Please. Yes.
Sorry, it's not really related to the main part of your story, but there was a very brief mention of Buddha asking some monks and nuns to help with meditations as well as funerals. You mentioned it, and I just wondered what traditional funerals were like and what roles spiritual people played in those funerals. Were they there to help the people who passed away, as well as people who are left in the current life?
There are a couple of aspects. On the one hand, of course, obviously, the monks would assist those who are suffering, right? Someone dies, you feel sad, and maybe a monk who's cheerful or who has equanimity is a good person to speak to and to have at a ceremony. they used to cremate. That means they used to burn people. They still do in India and most of the Asian countries, where Dharma, that means Buddhism, Hinduism, can be summarized under the term Dharma, has an influence there. We find this tradition of burning the bodies. That is still the case. But you're right that an advanced meditator is also said to be helpful to those who have passed. So when someone has passed and we say that the person is perhaps confused about where they are now, then an advanced meditator can sense that person's mind or that person's, what has remained of that person, and can help them to, sort of move into the next life or into the next plane of existence. So that's, of course, an invisible part. There's the visible part of the monk or nun attending and helping with the funeral. And then on the other side, there is this aspect of helping, guiding through the process. And here, without me asking Adityaji's permission, I just have to tell this story. Adityaji and I, we were in Thailand at the monastery. And in the evening, there was a program and the master, he walked past. And then I knew that I wanted to go back to my hut to meditate. And Adityaji sort of stayed on. And then I believe he stayed for a whole hour or so for another program, not realizing, or realizing only till the very end, that it was in fact a funeral. So he was the only person there who didn't realize he was attending a funeral. So I think that's a great anecdote. But is that an answer for you, Ayumu?
Yes. Yeah.
So that's the visible part of the funeral, where the monks and the nuns, they would conduct or they would help. And then there's the invisible part where they would, using their spiritual insight, they would help those who have passed.
Yeah, that's very good, because I think for me, the invisible part was maybe, unclear.
Sure, yes. And then someone asks, how can we overcome powerful or subtle kleshas? A powerful or subtle klesha. All kleshas are powerful, you see, but I understand what you mean. Those that are perhaps lodged deeper inside us, deeper anger, deeper discontentment, deeper upset and all that. I understand the question. The answer is always the same. There are two things you can do. The one is, like the breath meditation, you come back to something that grounds you, something that is your, you come back to that basis. The breath, the inhalation, exhalation will continue till the moment we leave this body. So to come back to that grounds us. Say there is a lot of anger and I recognize it and I come back to the breath, it actually grounds me. And then the anger can sort of remain a little bit, but I'm with the breath. I'm with the breath. And then slowly the anger dissipates. The other thing we can do is we can replace the anger or the other klesha consciously through maitri or through compassion. This takes a little bit of willpower, where, say, I have a lot of upset against someone, I consciously counteract that upset by wishing that person happiness and ease, or by having compassion for that person. I wish you to be free from suffering, understanding that that person too suffers. I wish you to be free from suffering. And when we do this for a while, you see, it's not just a one-time wish. It is a meditation. When we do it for a while, 5 minutes, 6 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, that anger or strong klesha will dissipate. The worst we can do is to ruminate around the klesha, to ruminate around the anger, around the upset, around the envy, around the jealousy. That's the worst we can do, because ruminating around it only strengthens it. So there are two things you can do to sum up. The one is you come back to a concentration-based meditation like breath. You come back to that and you just let the anger or the klesha, you let it do what it's doing till it dissipates of its own accord. The other is you consciously counteract it through Maitri, through Karuna. Mantra meditation, by the way, is also a concentration-based meditation. So, yes, you can also take a mantra. You can strongly go into the mantra. My experience, however, is that coming back to the breath, which is something very clearly present, is often a little more efficient, and then you can do a mantra, if you like. Whereas instantly going to a mantra doesn't necessarily change your anger or upset. Sometimes it's almost that you're then using the mantra like a weapon. No, I'm just joking. You're chanting the mantra and you're actually really angry, and that's not auspicious. So, yes. Then here someone asks, can we transmute or see through our kleshas? Yes, but that is quite advanced. That is an advanced way of looking at the state. But that's something one can learn a little later. At this level, it is important to have something that works. Later, yes, one can just see through it. That's true. But first, we need to either ground ourselves with the breath or practice Maitri Karuna as an antidote. These are the two things instantly you can apply which work. So we are at the end of the session. Is there any urgent other question? Then we will conclude and see you again soon. Please be aware of your inner states. Use this precious opportunity to overflow with Maitri and Karuna for others. May you be happy. May you be at ease. Namaskar.